Number 1. The Cousin. This is a hard story to tell for a couple of reasons. First off, I was really young when this story happened, so the memory is not the greatest in the world. My parents have told me the story over and over to refresh my memory, but they tell it differently, even between each other. The second reason I will tell you at the end of the story. I was 6 years old, and I was definitely a mama's boy. I followed my mom everywhere, and always wanted her attention. I remained like this throughout her entire life. Well, when I was 6, a cousin of mine named Ethan moved in with us. His parents had recently died in a fire, and his mom was my mom's sister. So my mom took him in, and when she did, everything changed dramatically. Ethan barely ever talked. I guess that is pretty normal for a kid who just lost his parents. Not only that, but he lived in town. I won't mention where this happened, but for the record, it is not the United States. And we lived in the country. I imagined before that he had friends that he could go out and play with all the time. But we lived far away, in a house that wasn't close to other homes, to know anyone. I was the only one that Ethan had to play with, but Ethan wouldn't play. He wouldn't go outside with me and try to climb trees or things like that. He wouldn't play board games or anything at all. What he did do, however, was something that I definitely did not like. Ethan was super attached to my mother. Being a mama's boy, I wanted all of her attention. But Ethan would follow her around. Sometimes he would hold her skirt with his hand, as if he was trying to keep her from getting away. If my mom or I tried to get him to stop doing this, he would start screaming and crying. Everyone thought it was just easier to let him do what he was doing. And the entire time, it made me really mad. I was really young and probably too young to go out and explore the woods. But with Ethan being around my mom all the time, it was really the only thing that I had to do. So one day, which was actually a pretty weird day, I went out in the woods to have a look around. Well, being out there was a lot more enjoyable than I thought it would be. The sky was covered with dark thunder clouds, and I was in danger of getting caught in a storm. However, I really loved the atmosphere of the darkness during the day, the wind, and the occasional bolt of lightning and crack of thunder that would pierce the darkness of the storm. I don't know just how long I was out there, really, and at first I didn't care. I just wanted to be by myself. However, when I decided to go home, I had no idea how to get there. I tried walking back the way that I came, but I couldn't be sure which way I had come from. I hadn't taken the time to look at any landmarks that would remind me of the way out of the place. I was too young at the time to even think of that. The only Lost in the Woods story I had ever heard was Hansel and Gretel. Hansel? 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 And I didn't have crumbs of bread to lay down so I could remember my path. I wasn't worried at first. I thought it would be easy to find my way home. I only had to keep walking the same amount of time that I walked into the woods, and that would leave me out of the woods. My 6-year-old mind accepted this as fact, as silly as it might seem nowadays. Well, my idea didn't work, and the storm kept brewing and brewing. I was expecting it to break at any moment, and that scared me too. I mean, I'm not scared of storms, but I'd never been out in one before. The idea of doing that is what scared me. Unfortunately, despite the fact that it seemed like it would storm at any moment, it didn't start raining. For that I was very thankful. I kept thinking I would get even more lost by the minute, and I would never find my way home. I thought about bobcats and coyotes, animals that we knew were in the area, and the idea scared the hell out of me. Even if the animals didn't get me at first, I didn't have any food. Once I came across a creek and I drank a little water from it, but That was really all that was out there. My young mind was convinced that I was definitely going to die out there. Then I saw something in the distance. It was smoke. I immediately thought that somebody, possibly my father, had made some sort of bonfire. Even if it was not my dad, it could be someone who could take me back to my family. So I walked in the direction of the smoke. I was a lot less scared than I had been before. I knew I was going to get out of the woods and everything would be okay. I even remember smiling and running a little toward the smoke. As I got closer, I realized that the smoke was definitely coming from my yard. I thought maybe my parents were worried that I had gotten lost in the woods, and they made the smoke as a signal to help me get home. I was happy and I sprinted the rest of the way back into the yard of my house. My heart dropped, though, when I got close enough to actually see what was going on. No one had built a bonfire to help me find my way out of the woods. The house that I lived in for my entire life was on fire. And it wasn't just any small fire, the entire house was completely engulfed in flames. I stopped in the woods, looking at the most horrifying scene that I'd ever seen in my life. I didn't know what to think until I saw my family standing in the yard. My parents were there, and Ethan was standing beside my mom as always. I ran out of the woods directly towards my parents. My mom grabbed me and hugged me. She hadn't known that I had gone out into the woods, and she thought that I had been hiding in the house somewhere. She thought I possibly could have been dead, and she was absolutely terrified until she noticed me coming out of the woods. And the fire department came, but it didn't really matter that much. There wasn't a lot they could do, as there were no hydrants out in the country. The truck did have a tank of water, if I remember it correctly, but it didn't stop our home from burning right down to its foundation. The official report was that the house was burned down by accident. However, even being 6 years old, I didn't accept that. It seemed too weird to me. Ethan's parents died in a house fire. Less than 3 months after he came to live with us, our house caught on fire, but no one died. It seemed like an awfully weird coincidence to me. Yeah, I think Ethan burned his house and killed his parents. I think he burned down our house and maybe tried to kill us. But I kept this thought to myself for many years. Ethan is on the autism spectrum, which I think might explain his behavior with my mom. I do want to make this clear. I don't think it has anything to do with him burning down houses, though, so please don't think that. I think separate from his autism, he's just an evil little fuck. My grandma took him in and adopted him basically after that. I only saw Ethan when we went to visit my maternal grandma. I was glad he was gone. No other houses burned, so maybe I was wrong about him. I don't think so, though. Number 2. Sandbar. I grew up as a sort of only child with my mother. My father and her were not together, but I don't want to go too deep into that. Although my mother never had any other kids, my father eventually had a boy and a girl, so I had 2 half-siblings, who were about 10 and 8 years younger than I was. I occasionally would do things with my dad, such as staying with him for a week or so here and there. It was nice to see my brother and sister grow up, and sometimes we went hiking and on camping trips, and that was always pretty fun. Well, it wasn't always that fun. There was one time when it wasn't fun at all, and that's the story I'm going to tell. We had what you would call a sort of close call. We went out camping by the river on a sandbar. I was 16 years old at the time. My brother was 8 years old and my sister was 6. We had 3 tents set up on the sandbar. There was one for my dad, one for me, and one for my siblings to share. We were going to be there for a few days and try our luck at fishing in the river. Everything was set up really good. My dad and I gathered wood, and we made a good bonfire. And we got some coals going to start cooking some of the fish that we caught. Fishing was something all 4 of us could do, although it was only my dad, who caught anything that we were able to actually eat. It seems a bit of a waste to try and cook minnows. While we were cooking, we heard something down the river. It took a little bit, but we noticed a boat coming down the river. The people in the boat were acting really loud and rowdy, making tons of noise and such. Even before they got close to us, my dad and I figured out that they must have been really, really drunk. When they got close to us, we saw that they were all college-age kids. When they noticed us, they started waving and such. Then they steered the boat toward the sandbar that we were camping on. They anchored the boat by the sandbar, a little ways up from where we were camping. So at first, I thought that they were just going to make their own camp and have no involvement with us. How wrong I was. It was 2 couples and a single guy. They were all drunk and maybe stoned off of their asses, but the single guy was the drunkest one of all. I couldn't figure out how the guy was even able to stand. He was so way out of it. They were playing loud music and still acting rowdy. They brought their boombox and their beer, and they eventually came over to our bonfire. They joined us there. We didn't say anything. My dad was in his late 40s, and I was 16, but we knew how to be careful with a bunch of drunken students. Alcohol can change a person dramatically. My dad and I talked with them, mostly just to keep them happy. After a while, though, one of the couples asked to borrow one of the tents. Before anyone could say anything, I offered my tent. I had a good idea of why they wanted the tent, and figured I better offer mine before one of the younger kids decided to offer their own. They were in the tent for about 3 minutes. Just a side note from the story right now, but if you were gonna bone, why would you only do it for 3 minutes? I mean, what could you possibly accomplish in 3 minutes? The other couple were pretty shit-faced, and I was wondering how they couldn't pass out. In fact, several times their eyes would close and they would sway quite a bit. Still, they wouldn't quite pass out yet. The single guy, who was even drunker than they were, was the one that scared me the most, though. He had a big hunting knife that was sheathed and strapped onto his belt. I'd been keeping an eye on him the whole time, in case he decided to use it. He did take it out, and I was about to do something, but he walked away from us. There was a tree stump out on the edge of the sandbar, and he went over to it. He kept throwing the knife at it, over and over again. My dad had a fillet knife to use for the fish. It was the sharpest knife I had ever seen in my life. He kept it hidden on him the whole time. I went and got the hatchet that we used to chop the wood, and I kept it close to me at all times. I decided I knew what I had to do. I went to all the tents and I took the sleeping bags out of them. I do wish I had taken my sleeping bag out before I allowed those 2 to go into my tent, but oh well. I moved all the bags to my dad's tent. We were all going to sleep in there. The kids were confused because I don't think they knew what was going on at all. They complained because they wanted their own tent, but I made them stop. The 5 college students then decided to go play in the water. They were swimming around and splashing and such. A couple of them started cussing, and 2 of the guys, the single guy and one of the couples, began to fight a bit. I don't know how bad the fighting was. I was just trying to pay as little attention to them as possible. We just all went into the tent when it was dark enough outside. We had lights to read books, but it was really hard the whole time. They kept playing loud music, whooping and cussing, and doing who knows what. At one point we noticed shadows. 2 of the students had come remarkably close to our tent, and it seemed like they were fighting again. I still had my hatchet, and I was totally prepared to use it if I had to. One of the guys stumbled and nearly fell in the tent, but he was able to compose himself somehow. My brother and sister somehow were able to fall asleep, but my dad and I remained awake. We listened for hours as they partied, argued, cussed, and fought. Eventually, around 4 a.m., I heard the boat start, and I listened as it rowed away. Finally, I was able to get a little bit of sleep. When we got up in the morning, we noticed that one of our coolers had been thrown in the fire. The other 2 tents had been trampled on and were leveled. Fortunately, that was the only thing they did, and none of us got hurt. You never know what people will do when their state is altered. I'm not judging, though. Hell, later in my life, I partied harder than they did, and that was only a few years later. But hell, that was one of the scariest nights that I'd ever experienced. Number 3, Grandma. I always thought my grandma was really weird. I never liked visiting her house when I was a kid. She wasn't one of the stereotypical grandmas that loved their grandchildren, baked cookies, etc. My grandma was very anal about her house. She never seemed to like having the kids over because she was always afraid that we would break things. It wasn't really until I was a teenager that she seemed to trust me being over at the house at all. But even then, she had a rule about not touching anything she had there. You couldn't read her books, you couldn't touch her knickknacks, and don't even wonder how protective of her paintings she was. And I understand on some level. I can't say that I would want to be like her, and I never have, but her house was her house, and she had every right to be as overprotective of it as she wanted to be. Still, I hated it, though. My grandma passed away, and we never had the occasion to become close to each other. However, she did will some of her things to all of us. Surprisingly, she willed the house to me. I could only guess it was because I was the only one of her family who didn't own a home. But she also willed her knickknacks, paintings, and books to me, and insisted in the will that I keep all of them in the home, like she wanted. Well, I appreciated what she did. Still, I didn't want all that stuff in the house. I didn't like it, and now that the house was mine, I wanted to make it the best that I could. I took some boxes and began taking all of her stuff down. I took very good care of it. I wrapped the knickknacks in bubble wrap before I put them in the box. Even though I didn't have a close relationship with my grandma and I didn't like her stuff, I still wanted to take the best care of it that I could. There was a big closet off the foyer in the front of the house. I carried the first box over there and I set it down. I opened the door, prepared to put the box of knickknacks in there. I picked up the box and stood up. I looked into the closet. My grandma was standing right there in the closet. She had a mean look on her face, and she sternly shook her head no. Then she was gone. I nearly dropped the box, but I was lucky that I didn't. I was scared shitless. I realized I had just seen the ghost of my grandma, and she didn't want me to put her knickknacks away. I put my grandma's things back up. I still own the house and her things are displayed. I never bother them because I don't want her to come back again. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. This is Country Thursday since Wednesday we did Horror Cliché Theater. If you haven't watched that, check out my shorts. That sounds kind of funny when you say it like that. But check out the shorts and see if you would enjoy it. I don't know how many of my listeners were subjected to the snowstorms that the United States had. I actually kind of enjoyed it myself. I like the snow. I live in Tennessee and we only got a couple of inches. I mean, I'm used to Chicago where you get sometimes several feet of snow. So this was nothing to me. I actually went out for a walk in it and it was great. People looked at me kind of weird from their cars. And I just looked out the window and I saw a couple of flurries, so who knows what's going to happen. But it's all good for me. I like the cold and snow. Like you guys too, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a like, share it with somebody, give me a comment. I try to get back to most of the comments all the time. I do miss some, which I apologize when I do that. Try to do better. If you're not subscribed, you can hit the subscribe button and the bell. The bell will notify you each time a video comes out. And I'm really going to try to work out this Country Wednesday thing so we'll get our videos on Wednesday. If you like scary country stories, make sure to come back every Wednesday. For right now, though, I have one thing left. Please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet. and check under your bed because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.